Rabbi Juan Mejia from Rabbis Without Borders, and Dr. Tomer Corinaldi from Kumi Ori Center. Please join the stage. This panel is about, mainly, as I see your topics, is about the Anusim, which one of the topics is the false narrative, or talking about moving beyond the Anusim narrative. My narrative regarding the Anusim is from Marcus Ignis' famous book from the famous author from Cordova, La Gesta del Marino. I read it in Hebrew. It's called Anus. I recommend to all of you. And I'll tell you a short story from my family. My father made Aliyah from Argentina in 1971. And I spoke with my grandmother, who is from Argentina. And I asked her to tell me about her life. And she told me that during the 60s, she went with my grandfather to Jujuy. Jujuy is in the end of Argentina, in the north. Nobody visits there. Don't feel bad that you haven't been there. And in Jujuy, they were invited by the mayor and his wife to a Friday night dinner. So they went to the dinner, and just before the dinner, then the house, you need to imagine the house, full of crosses and so on, a very Catholic family. And just before dinner, the wife of the mayor went to downstairs to the basement, because they have a tradition in the home to light 2 candles of the wife every Friday night, and she had no clue. And my grandmother asked her, "Are you Jewish?" And she said, "Oh, hell no, why do you curse me?" And that was the kind of story that we have in the family, that this is a phenomena which is actually real and live right now. So without me telling any more stories, I would like to pass the right of speech to Professor Avraham Gross. Please, Professor Gross. And you have 15 minutes, and it's with me.
Yeah, you promised me 20 minutes, but, emet li sha'ata. I actually playing it by ear because I prepared much longer, as I always do, and from what I learned yesterday and today, that this audience is much more informed about the basics. So what I did during the first session was to strike down about 50% of what I have to say. And on the other hand, please bear with me. My English is a little slower than Sergio's. and last but not least, I brought the wrong so let's find out. So again, thanks to everybody, to Ophir and to everybody else who was involved in organizing it. I know how difficult these things are. So let me start with the first part of a historical short introduction. Portuguese New Christians, or Marranos, or Conversos, or Bnei Anusim, henceforth, found their way to Brazil from the early 16th century and in large numbers. According to conservative estimates, they constituted up to 30% of the immigrants. The late Professor Anita Nowinski, the godmother of Brazilian New Christian Studies, she more than doubles this figure. Many of them were merchants. They owned much of the sugarcane plantations and trade. Others were drawn to the gold, gems, and later diamonds in the area of Minas Gerais. Well over 1,000 files against them by the Inquisition teach us much about them, including the geography of the settlement, the social traits, and their concealed identity. while many fires deal with Judaism in Rio, around Rio de Janeiro, the majority of those who did not intermarry with old Christians or with black women, as late as the 18th and middle of the 18th century, lived in the northeast in the captaincies of Pernambuco and Paraíba. Different circumstances might have contributed to the long duration of crypto-Jewish existence both in Portugal and in Brazil, perhaps specifically. One, there was no solid permanent branch of Portuguese Holy Office in Brazil, but rather occasional visits of an inquisitor who was sent there starting in 1591. Secondly, in the first half of the 17th century, the Dutch conquered Pernambuco from Portugal, and a daughter community of the Great Amsterdam community was established in Recife. The freedom of religion and the existence of normative Jewish community did much for the ongoing preservation of Jewish identity of those who chose to continue their lives as crypto-Jews, and for those who returned to Judaism only to revert back to crypto-Judaism once the Portuguese reconquered Recife. I should mention here also that many of the inquisitorial files deal with 18th century Judaism. That's very late. We know very little about those new Christians during the 19th and most of the 20th centuries. We don't know much about the return of individuals to normative Judaism during this period. The phenomenon of return certainly existed in the second half of the 20th century, but on an individual basis, and one might say even in secret. The return process started to gain real momentum during the 1990s and onward. I'll skip here a page dealing with evidence of Jewish origin, like material evidence that really doesn't exist, customs, genealogy, genetics, memory. This probably will come up in the other 3 or 4 lectures that deal with Anusim. Now, the general process of return, and that's what the main part of what I have to say. Firstly, we're dealing with individualists who arrived at the point they are at on their own, and that's very important. These are people whose families, by and large, do not join nor support the Bnei Anusim in the new identity quest. Okay. As to the process of return, let me use some definitions of Maranism of the early modern period, that's 300 years ago, and attempt to apply it to the situation today. Israel Revach's definition has been a potential Judaism which entry into the Jewish community transformed most often into real Judaism. This definition includes individuals who started to Judaize already in the Iberian Peninsula. Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi went one step further, and that's more important for us. He pointed to a prior stage which shifts a person into, so to speak, a neutral zone, even before making any real leap towards Judaism. This stage could be initiated by a variety of triggers. The common element of all was the rejection of Christianity. This could be due to personal persecution or based on intellectual and ideological grounds. Thus, actually, most of the new Christians could be lumped into this group because all those things could happen to them, and then one day you'd find them in Amsterdam, for example. Turning to the 21st century phenomenon, the element of persecution, of course, is gone. No inquisition, neither purity of blood laws. And so we basically remain with one dominating trigger. It seems that the process of return to Judaism comes with an initial shift from Catholicism into a neutral zone, namely doubting or outright denial of Christian dogmas. While many simply assimilate into the fast stream of modern life, becoming everything that is not Catholic, some with deep religious sentiments are looking for an alternative outside of Christianity. For such people, incidental information about their genealogical origin might break wide open the door into a search for what they perceive as their forgotten heritage, lost identity, and stolen faith. This process could have a few stops on the way, such as evangelism, which is a strong current trend in Brazil. Some might then renounce evangelism and join Messianic Jews, which is easier to accept rather than complete rejection of Jesus, and only in the final stage to embrace normative Judaism. Normative, by normative I mean all the Jewish movements, although of course they all prefer Orthodox Sephardic traditional Judaism. It is important to stress that this phenomenon of stating your people is my people and your God is my God is primarily religious. It is also nationalistic and is related to the state of Israel and the dream of making one day Aliyah. However, this element is secondary. First and foremost, it is religious identity they are looking for. From this perspective, looking at an Israeli edit, from this perspective, the Bnei Anusim can be grouped with the Jews of Ethiopia. All the above teaches us that we are dealing with a highly individual process of long duration. One does not wake up one morning looking at the mirror saying, today I'm going to change my religion. Going out of the religious closet and shedding one's religious identity in favor of a religion which does not respond with great enthusiasm and does not embrace the Bnei Anusim with open arms is highly risky and takes much thought, learning, spiritual inner struggle, time, and courage. In this respect, having no group support, this movement of individuals is different, of course, from the communal Ethiopian experience. Reading and learning is done through information available in the internet and through translations of sources and books on Judaism. Imagine an individual going through circumcision, an ultimate act of conversion, at the age of 40. Such an act reflects the culmination of years of thinking, deliberation, and internal struggle with the tradition, culture, and religious identity which he grew up with, and to which he thereby grants a divorce. This amounts to connecting oneself to historic ancestral religion and peoplehood, even before its contemporary representatives, rabbis and communities, promise him any recognition and entry into the exclusive club of Judaism. Naturally, such an individual seeks the warmth of a supporting community. To an extent, Internet Bnei Anusim groups served this need as virtual communities, a marketplace where feelings and opinions have been expressed and information was sought. As I mentioned in my introduction, such groups exist for the past 20 years. Already then, 20 years ago, some of the leading figures claimed that regardless of rabbis and communities' reserved attitude and unwillingness to welcome them into the fold, yeah, that's what it says. Wait. Yeah, it is fold. They should form their own communities as a statement declaring, we are here and we are not going anywhere. Indeed, such communities came together in cities mainly in northeastern Brazil, Natal, Recife, and other smaller places, there exist today dozens of groups, congregations, communities. Some of them went as individuals through conversion process by rabbis of all denominations of movements. The major problem of those groups is the lack of authoritative leadership. It is extremely difficult to create a religion-sustainable community with no religion leadership, especially when each member reaches this station of their religious trajectory as individuals. Each person used to be, quote unquote, his own rabbi, so to speak, and understands Judaism in his own, זה צריך להיות 5 לפי דעתי. לא ראיתי. To avoid anarchy and endless disagreements over what is and how to practice Judaism, leadership is a must. Indeed, the fragmentation of those fragile communities can be seen time and again due to this problem. This results, נדלג על זה. Let's skip that too. Okay, let me sum up. Let me close by saying that we are dealing with a crowd of young and old, modern, intelligent, mostly religiously motivated, sometimes quite advanced in knowledge and practice of Judaism, not to be mixed with other groups or individuals who have other lesser ideological considerations in mind. None of the normal elements of the present Israeli Giyur controversy exist in this case, which is, in short, kosher halachically and perfect case of win-win for all parties involved. If I may, I finished basically, but I want to give the last word to Paul Goodman. You know who Paul Goodman was? Not Benny Goodman. He was the president of the Portuguese Marrano Committee in London, and he writes in 1931, after visiting northeastern Portugal, places where there were largely new Christians, a long article in a Jewish Chronicle, 1931. He ends it, and that's of course a non-academic ending, but here we are. It would seem that the same fate, he talks about the Sabbateans in the Donme before. It would seem that the same fate will befall the Marranos in Portugal if they are to be left without any Jewish help for any further length of time. If this should come to pass, history will record that majestic indeed was the power of endurance of Judaism, but that it had no longer either the vitality or the will to save those long lost but nevertheless faithful Jews in Portugal who, with a fidelity unique even in the 4,000 years of Jewish annals, had striven in vain to remain within the community of Israel. And that's relevant to us, our generation too. Thank you.
So despite the challenge with the glasses, you managed to do it quite well. I would like to invite now Rabbi Juan Mejia to speak from Rabbis Without Borders, to speak about moving beyond the Anusim narrative in Latin America. Please, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. I would like to make a correction. I am not speaking here on behalf of Rabbis Without Borders. I do belong to Rabbis Without Borders, but more on behalf of Bechol Lashon and myself. And I want to thank the Mass Center for Jewish Journeys of the American Jewish University, the Herzl Institute, and Anu for hosting us and finally having this conversation. It's been long overdue. So I admit that the title of my talk is a little clickbaity, because this is a panel about Anusim. I'm here and saying we need to move beyond it. So what do I mean by this? I do not deny that there is a strong traditional narrative and communities that still hold on to their Iberian roots. We see it in Brazil, we see it in Portugal and Belmonte, and all over the globe there's small, mostly rural, mostly peripheral communities where precisely because of isolation, people have been able to keep their identity, I would not say intact, but keep a memory. That is the story of my family. I grew up Catholic in Colombia, and my grandfather said that his grandfather, back when they lived in the farm, back when they lived in the homeland in Antioquia in northwest Colombia, that they could keep certain Jewish traditions and that they saw themselves as Jews, and they pretty much kept an endogamic, think West Virginia, but Sephardic, like very, very close-knit community of people keeping their traditions, not great for genetics, but I would love to pass you my data. I don't know what you'll make from that. But these communities exist, and they need to be helped, but there is an element of romanticization of the phenomenon, and when people that are coming into Judaism, whether they're holding on to this identity or they suspect it or they aspire to it, it can create a stumbling block. I am addressing the situation that is now mostly happening in Latin America, where people who are looking for their roots are not in the old country, right, with the old homestead. They are in cities. They're coming from all over. Mexico City brings people from all over. Bogota, Barranquilla, it's modernity, right? They're creating very dense cities. People are mixing. That's what happened in the generation of my grandparent, well, my father, right? He moved to the city and he met someone who was not Mejia, and married and had me. So the supposition that the people who are coming into Judaism that are aspiring or claiming this identity, I think needs to be reevaluated because there's more at play. This is now more of a sociological urban phenomenon, part of a bigger zeitgeist, which is virtual and global, rather than local small communities. And by fixating on, oh, do you really have this background in order to allow you to access Jewish identity, feels to me like genetic gatekeeping, which Jews should be very wary, not just because of the optics, but as a rabbi, this is not kosher. The institution of conversion is a human right, is open to everybody. And while I was working in the field, and in the beginning I am a Bnei Anusim rabbi and I'm working with the Bnei Anusim, but the more I met with people in the American Southwest, in Mexico, in Colombia, and Peru, I realized that we needed a new framework because the genetic background, the Jewish genetic background of Latinos, I think every day, with genetic information and genealogical information and historical research, the picture that emerges is that pretty much every single Latino that has a modicum of European background has a Jew in the woodpile. How do I know this? I'll tell you how I know this. I graduated with 100 other elite Colombian boys, and we are the future of Catholic Colombia. I've gotten 30 WhatsApps in my graduation group WhatsApp that say, hey, I got my Sephardic citizenship. Like, great, do you want, like, I teach Torah, do you want to, no. Like, what do these 30 classmates of mine have that, like, the taxi driver in Bogota or the bricklayer in Bogota don't have? They don't have 8,000 euros to go through the process of getting a Spanish passport, right? And if they did, very easily you can connect someone. 500 years is 20 generations. That is, if you are a healthy person, not like my family, that is 2 to the power of 10 ancestors. And we know that the people who are coming to the New World, it's 3 months in a piece of wood through stormy seas. People that ended up in the coast of Latin America were fleeing from something, or were very, very greedy, or both. But definitely there is a significant core of the early settlers of Latin America that was Jewish. 500 years later, you do the math. So we can't say, oh, we need to find the descendants of everybody. Let's assume that most everybody is descendant of Jews. That cannot be the identity marker that we, in current, urban, modernized, fairly secularized societies in Latin America, can hold on for people who want to build a Jewish identity. So if this is not a sufficient explanation, what is the explanation? I used to, before the pandemic, go around North American synagogues and communities and JCCs saying, like, why is this happening? Why do people want to be Jewish? It's so hard, it's so awful being Jewish, but yet we gatekeep it so hard, even if it's so awful. It's very contradictory. And I would say this depends on three independent processes that are now coming to a point. The first of it is what I call the zeitgeist of religious migration. The previous Pew report, not the immediately previous, but the 2013, Karen, discovered something fantastic and shocking that I don't think we are talking about enough. That 50% of North American citizens die in a different religion or denomination from the one that they were born. 50%. Now, most of this is intra-Christian migration. People who are born Catholic become Baptist, people who are Baptist become East Orthodox. There's also a notable movement towards American secular culture, American chilonim, who celebrate Christmas, celebrate Easter, but have no religious affiliation, do not go to church, and identify themselves mostly as American rather than Christian. That is a big portion. The fastest growing religion in America is none. N-O-E, not nuns, with like the ones that hit me in the N-O-N-E. Those are the ones that are growing, or spiritual but not religious, which is also a growing number of people. In this zeitgeist of the market of ideas, and Professor, you said it, a lot of people start saying, ooh, there's this great Christian church down the street, right, that gives me a little bit more than the Catholic service. And then through evangelism or Pentecostalism, they discover Messianic communities and say, wow, Torah is really good. And finally, a lot of people manage to do the switch. I don't want middle of the road. I want to go all the way, ad hasof. And it's actually then, or when they access Messianic communities, that this search for Jewish identity appears in the cities. Like, the Jewish identity is not the motor that is bringing people to Judaism. The search for identity is an expression of an interest in Judaism as a way to say, look, I'm really Jewish. I really deserve to be in this people because my last name is because of my genetic, because of family traditions. It is a post facto, in many ways, narrative to ease their way into Jewish life. It doesn't work. Not with Israel, not with the local communities, but we'll get to this. So there's a zeitgeist of a religious migration, and once people say, hey, I don't have to be Christian, I don't have to be Catholic, I don't have to be Jew, I don't have to be Christian. In this group of my fellow graduates from my school, there is many people who become evangelical, some are dabbling in Buddhism, some are very strongly secular atheist agnostics. So this is something that, although we have solid data from the United States, is also happening all over the world. It's global. The second issue, which Professor Ishalom mentioned yesterday, the presence of Israel is a powerful motivation. And not just, oh, I want to make aliyah, I want to benefit, just the ubiquity of Israel in the news, in the consciousness. People know that there is a Jewish state and therefore know that Judaism exists. Now, the press in Latin America is not terribly favorable to Israel, but for a lot of people that actually served as a something that enticed them. Like, what is it with this little country and this people that they make so much trouble and so much noise? And then when they research Judaism, they fall in love and say, this is what I want. So a bigger presence in the mediascape, in the metaverse, as if you will, of Israel also creates an enticing, very public face of Judaism that people can relate to. And the elephant in the room which I think is going to change every single aspect of our lives, and spirituality and religion are not exempt, is the internet. When I started my Jewish journey in 1998, I went to my library and I took out all the books on Judaism, all 6 of them, and I read them and I was very excited. Oh, this is my thing. This is no longer the case. Today, wherever you are in the world, if you have one of these tchotchkes, you have access to Sefaria. Tons of shiurim of rabbis, usually in your own language. We still are lagging behind in some languages, but in Spanish and French and Russian and English, if you know English, you have access to the entire corpus. And not only that, but the internet has been the key element for community building. Every single emergent community in the world started as a Yahoo forum. Well, when Yahoo forums were a thing, and then Facebook, and now that's how people find themselves, right? I could have gone my entire life saying, oh, I'm a crazy little weird guy that his grandfather said his grandfather was Jewish, but once I can find people that are the same kind of crazy that I am, I can build community. And that is what has been happening. And it's creating bridges between these communities and rabbis in the United States and in Israel, and it is a global conversation, which means that setting a Jewish past or a Jewish genetics entrance test is futile. When a rabbi is doing, I don't know, a YouTube video on how to kosher dishes for Pesach for his community in Long Island, great, but the internet does not end in Long Island. Right? The same video is being watched in Indonesia, it's being watched in the Philippines. So it's throughout. These 3 things are causing a world in which the central core of Jewish identity is pivoting from ethnicity to alignment. In a world where I can have the entire Jewish world in my pocket, the entire tradition, the entire Torah, written and oral, in my pocket. And there is this zeitgeist of, I can pick a taxi, I can pick, well, not an Uber, but I can pick an Uber, a taxi, a bus, bicycle, I can walk. The same thing happens in the realm of the spiritual. The conversion narrative in the coast of America is still very focused on marriage and preserving the ethnic cohesion of the Jewish people, but I live in Oklahoma City, which is not in the coast. It's actually exactly in the middle. And all of the rabbis of the region, what they're reporting is they're coming in droves. We've spoke about icebergs. I actually think it's a tsunami. It's a demographic tsunami that's on its way. And right now we have 3 approaches. We have 2 approaches, but of course I'm going to add a 3rd one. The first approach is the current approach. And and that's the reality in the Latin American communities. They don't want to engage. Most people in Israel still don't want to engage with these communities. I don't have to tell you this is going to fail. Because in a world where you no longer need institutions to communicate, which is the world in which we live in, I can always go around and find people who will help me. I don't need the stamp and approval of institutions. The other model is we have to be very, very careful. We have a Jewish state. I can fairly say that everyone who is here is a Zionist, but we have to be very careful about making these communities into commodities. We have, yesterday, Professor Herb spoke, we need a robust diaspora. We need a robust diaspora. Also, if these communities become commodities, and the issue is we need to bring them all here, what is going to happen? The backlash from the Israeli, particularly the religious public, is not going to be, you are not going to have to wait for it, and I think it's going to drive a bigger wedge between the Israel community and the diaspora. My suggestion, and with this I'll finish, what is the Shvil HaMelech, the golden mean between these 2 things? I think Israel and the global Jewish community in this particular case needs to rely very strongly on North American institutions. North American institutions, North American rabbis of all movements, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, are far more willing to engage with these communities because the kind of Judaism that is this Judaism of mission or alignment Brit Goral, like Rabbi Soloveitchik said. We are all in the same boat. We might not agree of who is a halakhic Jew or how we pray or who we pray with, but if we're going to create this Brit Goral in the United States, rabbis already understand that we are moving towards a post-ethnic community, and these communities are in many ways para-ethnic, right? They come from a different ethnicity, but the model in the United States of more inclusive, diverse communities is a path. So my invitation, regard policy-wise, I'm a philosopher and a rabbi, so don't ask me for policy, I'm just a dreamer, is to rely heavily on the North American establishment that has both the means and the language and the conceptual framework to help this, and in many ways to pressure the relevant institutions in Israel to open this conversation, which has to be had at every level. I thank you very much, and I hope to see you all, whether in Eretz HaKodesh or B'chur. Toda rabba.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to invite now Corinaldi from Kumi Ori Center, which would at least solve my ignorance regarding the fact that we have Anusim in South Italy. So, please.
Shalom, hello everybody. I'm happy to be here in this important conference, and thank you for the invitation. First, I'd like to dedicate some words to my father and teacher, Professor Michael Corinaldi, Zichrono Livracha, who passed away about a month and a half ago. My father was a man who devoted his life to the return and acceptance of various groups of the Jewish people, and usually also against the mainstream and the dominant perception. The most prominent group that my father worked on their behalf was Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews. He established the Committee for the Immigration of Ethiopian Jewry and struggled to bring them to Israel and for the acceptance of their Jewish identity as it is. Other groups that my father helped were the Karaim, the Samaritans, the Sobotnik from Russia, the Descendants of the Anusim from Latin countries, and the Falashmura from Ethiopia. He was a lawyer who fought in the Supreme Court for the rights of these groups, a researcher who wrote 10 books, and a social activist who was connected and involved with the groups he was fighting for. For example, I want to mention, as a child, I remember myself going with my father to the protest against the Rabbanut that demand Giur Lechumra from the Ethiopian Jews and eating with them the traditional injera. My father was also the head of the Institution of the Studies of the Anusim of Netanya College. I came from an entirely different world, and I didn't always realize that I was walking in my father's path, but today more than ever, I understand the great heritage and vision my father left, which is probably the reason for being here now. The vision of the historic commitment to the eternity of Israel, to the various groups of Nidchei Israel, outcasts of Israel, which feel they belong to us. And we are committed to bring them closer to us and connect with them. Not just for them, but also for us. This is part of the wonder of the return to Zion, and we have no moral justification for denying these groups. I started my journey in Italy when I took 1 year off from my job as director of association and social worker, I decided to travel to Italy, the homeland of my father's family, which was always an essential component of my identity. Over time, God led me towards the south, away from the known Italian Judaism, to places where there are no Jewish communities. I met people from different places and far away. They showed interest and were excited to meet me as a Jew from the land of Israel, looking for kinship and connection to Israel and Judaism. Then I arrived at the Scola Nova synagogue in Trani, in the Puglia region, with a wonderful story, a synagogue that was converted to a church over 500 years ago and returned to its original purpose about 15 years ago. Thanks to the initiative of some locals and the collaboration of Rav Shalom Bachbut, who was the rabbi of Nepal in those days. When I asked to pray there, people from the area have heard about it and came to do Shabbatot with me, to do Shabbat with me, and so it was for several Shabbatot. And so I met special souls who for no rational reason had a longing for Jewish life and even a will to convert, which has become almost impossible in Italy today. Later on, I became aware of the phenomena of Jewish revival, which was reflected in the establishment of museums and collections of Judaism, the renewal of synagogues and archaeological sites, Jewish research, and increasing interest in Jewish culture. And I also learned about similar phenomena that exist in Portugal and Spain. This miraculous phenomenon fascinated me, and I decided to change my life in order to support and assist it. I went back to Israel and learned to Rabbanut at Machanaim Yeshiva and the Amiel Institute of Rav Birnbaum that is here now with us. And I have been active in this field in recent years. I want to share with you ideas based on the article of my father, Zichrono Livracha, wrote and has not yet been published. My wife, who is apparently belonged to a family of Anusim descendants from Porto, Portugal, and I helped him to collect materials for the article just lately. In examining the links between the descendants of the Anusim and Israel and Judaism, there are 5 basic elements in which the connection may manifest. In my travels to southern Italy, I met these elements in person, among the rest in a project of interviews I conducted with more than 40 people who feel connected to Israel and Judaism in the regions of Puglia, Sicily, and Abruzzo in southern Italy. The first element is the anthropological element. My father writes, the anthropological test for the determination of the religious and national identity of the descendants of Anusim is reflected in the practice of Judaism in secret. Scholars describe the set of hidden and religious beliefs of the Anusim as the religion of the Maranos. The Anusim kept their religion secret as a result of the existential need to hide the Jewish origin from the Inquisition, which pursued the Anusim for false impersonation as Christians. I have met Jews' customs, or customs that have a significant similarity to Judaism, preserved among groups and individuals, usually in the absence of the source. There are numerous examples, too many to list there, and I'll just name a few. too many to list there. I don't have a lot of time, so I need to skip. But I can say I met some traditions about mitzvot, commandments of the field, like leaving a plot with grain to the poor people, a peah, and not eating the fruits in the first 3 years. Things connected to holidays. There is a city in Sicily, Calta Girona, where the people have a holiday of lights in December, holiday of lights. And other things connected to holidays, to Shabbatot, a custom of mourning, and much more. I made a list in the interviews of a lot of traditions of people. The second point, I don't have time to read everything, but I will just mention the etymological element, yes, that refers to the general name of religious community and the families' names of the communities. Yeah. For example, we know there are 15 families in Palma de Mallorca that known as families of Chuates, they call the Anusim of Palma de Mallorca. I met, for example, in Sicily, there is a community called Bnei Ephraim that they, many people attribute their names to a Jewish source. Like, I can give one example, a family called Mazuzo, they think it's maybe connected to mezuzah, maybe also connected to the name Mazuz, a Jewish name from Tunisia that's close to Sicily. And there are much more examples. People from San Nicandro, a village that a lot of people converted from this village, that carry a lot of names of cities in Spain. This is really interesting in this place. So this is a second element, the names. The ethnic elements, yes, that in the past, we know that the Anusim was married between themselves, but they assimilated. Today we know, as was mentioned here, there is the possibility to do genetic tests, and we know that some regions, for example, there is a research about the region of Belmonte and Bragança in Portugal that show similarity of DNA to Jewish people, and I also met people that made blood tests and found similarity to. It's important to mention, this is not, my father talked about it a lot, this is not a proof. The DNA is not, Judaism is not DNA. But it's another element that can show the closeness. The historical elements, yes. My father talked about the law of return and also the new laws of citizenship of Spain and especially Portugal, that a lot of people got passports. Also their renovation of the relationship between the countries, and we know that yes, also the boycott imposed on Spain had finished de facto, the boycott of the Jews that was expelled from Spain. I can add to this element also the revival, the Jewish revival I talked about, in renewal of synagogues, museums, archaeology, interest in Jewish culture, Jewish tourism, that driven by local people, almost always by local people, not by Jews. So this is also historical element, a revival that we can see. Another element that my father didn't talk about, but I met a lot, is the emotional spiritual element, we can say. Yes, I can give examples of people that talked about sense of home that they describe in a visit at synagogues or in the land of Israel. Volunteering and contribution to Israeli organizations such as Keren Kemet, a sense of solidarity with Israel on the political level, participation in the struggle for the conscience, and they feel great pain for terror attacks. I have also a lot of examples, I don't have time. I can ask for 3 minutes? 3. Okay. So I can just say that there are, I met 3 groups, yeah? People that want to convert, people, larger group of people that left the Christianity, the official Christianity. They study Judaism and Hebrew, and they want to develop connection with the Jewish people. They want to study Judaism. They are in the middle, and even larger group of Christians that want to have connection, want to study Judaism, want to study Hebrew, all circles. I think there is a big significance to cooperate with all these circles. I don't have time now to explain, but we can say that first of all, our lost sons, and then even to develop a connection, it's something that have a lot of importance in the political level and also in the spiritual level. As we know, the prophets talk about it a lot. I also wanted to present a program I made, but I don't have time. Some other time. Program I made to work with these groups, with these people. I'm active in South Italy, mainly in Puglia region. And I want to finish with the words of the prophets. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, from Hamath, and from the islands of the Mediterranean. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the 4 quarters of the earth. Toda Rabba. Thank you very much.
So if you would continue to speak, I was really afraid that Ophir will fire me. So we have a couple of minutes for some questions, so please. Yes, sir.
Well, it's more a comment than a question, but I mean, to elicit a comment from the lecturers who have given us 3 very stimulating, very good papers. I think we may take into account 2 reasons enhancing this willingness to sort of return home, and your comments about this. One, the huge crisis of the Catholic Church, which especially in Latin America has lost tens of millions of faithful, and because of corruption and also because of certain internal inconsistencies. The second one is probably the failure of the capitalist system to provide the goods in terms of the persisting injustice and inequalities and the failure of the modern state. And so people are looking for meaning, a new sense of meaning. Then they will seek it, and some of them will find it in Judaism. By the way, in Latin America, some of them will find it in sort of pagan rituals and syncretism, as you know. On the other hand, a factor which is an obstacle, maybe delicate, is, in my view, I've visited Latin America, and of course I know Europe, social class. That is, the Jewish community as established sees clearly the social class differential with many of those who wish to join. Imagine the rich banker who is a Jewish member of the classic Jewish community, and his driver who is among the new community, and the driver who has now sort of converted says, now my son who is Jewish wants to marry your daughter. We are both Jewish. The answer is?
And I want to add, Professor de la Pergola, it's not just between Jews and emergent communities. Within emergent communities, my community itself my community in Barranquilla is unique, is a unique community in Colombia, or like many emergent communities are unique in the sense that they're trans class communities. You have people with a lot of money, professionals, doctors, lawyers. You have cab drivers. You have people who are working on the street selling things. And it creates tension even within the communities, right? Because you have the askanim, and how come the rich people always get to the board? So it's not just between the established communities. They have very Latin American issues, not just Jewish issues, which they do have. They like to fight in the board, but they also have very clear Latin American issues within.
One second. Questions, please. Question first and comments later, okay? Oh, he will first you and then.
So, in North America, in particular, there is an emphasis on ethnic and racial stratification. This is historically in America, it's just as true today. So, I think one of the things that's very attractive to people that are leaving kind of traditional religious backgrounds in Judaism is that it's always had this kind of interesting space in between an ethnic / tribal identity and religious experience. And so I think that some of the desire to point to that one Jew in my background amongst the descendants of Bnei Anusim, but also amongst African American and Caribbean Americans today, is connected to that wanting to combine religious and ethnic / racial experience. Does that exist in Latin America?
To whom?
Just in general, whoever wants to.
I think there's a lot, particularly with the new Sephardic citizenship things, like laws in Spain and Portugal, there's been, I would say, a negative approach to that, which is, I'm trying to prove I'm European. It also happens in the Southwest, which is one of the reasons I do no longer work in the American Southwest, because it was like, I am not Mexican, I am Espanol, like, but you're also Mexican. Like, so I think people are looking for community more than ethnicity, more than trying to find everyone's roots, which genetic testing is part of that, genealogy is part of that. But I think what makes people stay is, as I was telling somebody yesterday, it's Shabbat. Like when I convert people, I was like, what brought you here? Like, I have to ask this question. One is, I like the theology better. I like the freedom of not having original sin over my head and the threat of hell constantly over my head. That is a common reason. But almost with this, why do you want to be Jewish? And they look down, they look up, they smile, and they say Shabbat. And it's not like Dafka Shabbat. It's what comes with Shabbat. In an increasingly digital world, and we are now the Zoom generation, corporeal community spaces are at a premium.
When you convert them, do they do Brit Milah?
Yeah, 24. Tell you all about it. So people are looking for community, and if that community is more than ethnicity, is looking for values, right? People that come, it's not just in Latin America. In the heartland of the United States, if you ask any rabbi of any denomination, they'll say conversion is up to levels that they haven't seen. And now after the pandemic, it has doubled. 1 in 6 North American Jews is a convert. I don't know if you know that. 1 in 6, 16.7% of American Jews is a convert. I am not a demographer. I leave that but I have a hope that this number is going to increase. The article was in E-Jewish Philanthropy about 6 years ago, and the current Pew report has confirmed it. Not only that, but a huge percent of that are people of color.
I would like to give this person an opportunity to ask us a question, please.
לדבר בשמך? Two short comments. First of all, the place of the State of Israel in this entire awakening, I mentioned to you. It is also the theological point, because as you know, there was for almost 2,000 years there was that triumphant argument stemming from the Augustinian doctrine that Catholicism or Christianity said, well, you Jews, look where you are, where we are. We are the triumphant religion. We are right. And the state of Israel turned the things inside out or upside down. And you know, and once the state of Israel was established and successful and prosperous, those people who are looking for the truth in religion questioned so much more Catholicism and Christianity vis-a-vis the historical truth, so to speak, that Israel is triumphant. And one more thing to the last, because this is important. You're right that we need North American rabbis and institutions because this is the situation. But you should know that most rabbis, and Rabbi Birnbaum will agree or not with me, most rabbis would go with the trend that you're assigning to the American rabbis, and definitely from my experience from lectures, etc., I would say 80%, I know who would be excluded from this group, but 80% of Israelis will be very, very happy to participate in this huge utopic return.
Thank you. Please.
Whether you think that this phenomenon is more Jewish, as we like to think, or a more general spiritual look in the world. I mean, that people, there are Israelis in Israel that go to India and become Buddhists. So there are Buddhists who want to become Jewish. I mean, so it's not a Jewish phenomena, but it's a world phenomenon.
If I can answer, this is part of the things I wanted to talk about. The importance, I think, of Latin Europe, if you can say, the places, Spain, Portugal, and South Italy, where I saw a big connection between the places and between the people. Like the Stonestock, there is a renovation, archaeological renovation, renovation of, as I said, of synagogues, of museums, and the people from the same places also get this interest. Like there is a bond, there is a connection between the historical part and between this awakeness of the people that look for Judaism. That's why I think even though maybe in America the numbers are much larger, I think that in Europe we can see the roots. The roots. We go back in the history and we see the roots. That's why I think it's so important, and that's why I think it's not only general. Maybe some people yes, but I met a lot of people that for them the connection is emotional, is a feeling of belongingness, and not come from a general research that connected to the places.
I just want to add something very, it's a global phenomenon. And actually the Jewish religion, the Jewish people right now are mafsidim begadol. You have communities in Cali, Colombia, in which Wahhabi imams trained in America or trained in Saudi Arabia and Iran are going and opening mosques in depressed parts of the city. And you have now emergent mosques in all through Latin America. That's what the Pentecostal movement did 20, 30 years ago. They were establishing a new thing. They were addressing the failure of the Catholic Church, not only theologically and ideologically, but also physically, to provide a sense of community and in many cases, sipuk, like of real needs, of food and safety. And the only religion that is on the wall Humpty Dumptying, oh, is this kosher? It's us. Now, we do not have a robust missionary spirit, at least we used to, but 1,600 years of oppression will take it out of you. But I think we need urgent reassess of how conversion and how this works, because as here he's not here, but Rabbi Salam said last night, build communities. How long is that going to last? Okay, the generation that does the transformation, that has the circumcision when they're 40, 50, they have bled for this, and they will stick to it, even though they're getting abused, like there is no other word, by the Israeli institutions and the local institutions. The kids, particularly like Gen Z, millennials, I'm not going to put up with this. Like my father, okay, whatever, it's Jewish, but what has the Jewish people done for me? So we do have a very small margin of time to refocus how we deal with this. Why do we think it's important to do it? First of all, as a rabbi, I believe that conversion has always been, in my opinion, the crown achievement of Am Yisrael. Everybody had ethno-religion back in the day.
I would like to give an opportunity to one more question. So, okay?
We'll talk later.
So please. Yeah. You would like to ask a question? Sure, please. Sorry. Later.
The role of Israel, how these new emerging Jewish communities, where they see Israel in their emerging Judaism, and how can we affect a change in Israel to accept more these emerging communities? And people, I mean, what these conversions, if you say 1 in 6 are converted, where is Israel in this?
That's a biggest question. Afternoon, we have a couple of seminars about it. Can you ask your question, please? Yes?
First thing, Shalom. I'm a living testimony of what you just spoke about. This is my mother here. I was born.
Could you come forth and take this?
Yes, I can. Shalom, shalom. My name is Naftali Ben Israel. I was born in the city Dimona. That's down south in the Negev. And my question was, why is conversion the measuring rod of who someone is or represents? Based on being born here as a Tabari in Israel, you know, my mother coming from America to Israel from Chicago, deciding that, hey, I want my son to be born in the promised land. Why is conversion the measuring rod of who someone can be?
Okay, so I think this question is a bigger than this session. So I think it's good. We'll have the opportunity to answer it afterwards. So thank you very much for your time and for your presentation. And don't forget the question. It's an important question, but we'll deal with it later on. Thank you very much for your time and for your presentation.
אתה מכיר צאצאי היהודי סנקנדו? אני לא רוצה לדבר בדרום, הם איפה? בטבריה, נכון?
הם ליד צפת, אזור צפת.
זה סיפור מרתק, זה אחד